We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods in for Peter. And on the line is Congressman Ron Paul, a man who really needs no introduction, although he deserves one. This is a gentleman who, in my opinion, is an American hero. It's wonderful to see that he's finally winning some recognition for all the hard work he's put in over the years, this lonely work he's done in obscurity, and now here he is in the light of day, bringing so many unjustly neglected ideas and people and books into the light of day. It's just fantastic. So without delaying with you with all his credentials, we all know what they are, let me welcome Ron Paul to the program. Congressman Paul, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us this morning on the Peter Schiff Show.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Well, first let's talk about your book, which I've been promoting this morning. Your publisher overnighted me one, so I was able to look at it. It's called Liberty Defined. And I'll just say, this is the sort of book that a politician I wouldn't expect any other politician to be able to write. And I want to talk about some of the specific topics you've got in here. Let's just pick one almost at random. Executive power. Now, there are conservatives who think we should just have a conservative executive, and have him use executive power to carry out conservative goals. Why do you object to that?
Well, it's probably the opposite of what I believe in, what the Constitution was indicated for us to have, and it tends, trends toward, the authoritarianism of the king, and so the executive power was supposed to be subservient to the legislative power. The legislative branch of the government was supposed to be, the most important branch. But it's always amazed me at how readily the Congress over the many, many years has been quite willing to give up its prerogatives, almost begging and pleading that, the president takes over, whether it's a war power or trade policy or regulatory policy. It just goes on and on. So it's, to me, just the opposite of what we should have if we believe that the government's there to protect our liberties, not to run our lives.
And, of course, this devotion to executive power and a strong executive is entirely bipartisan, which leads to my next question. You have an entry here in Liberty Defined on bipartisanship, and you argue we've had too much bipartisanship. What do you mean by that?
Yes, that makes some people nervous because a lot of people think the solution is if those two parties could just get together. It's what they're getting together. I argue that bipartisanship is fine if you're doing the right thing, but
right.
We've had too much over the last 60 years. When you look at the economic policies, and I always refer to the famous quote by Nixon, we're all Keynesians now. So that's bipartisan. Both parties have liked executive power and going to war without declaration and the welfare state. It's on and on. If you had bipartisanship to repeal this, it wouldn't be so bad. I think the closest we've come to setting an example for bipartisanship in a healthy way was getting both Republicans and Democrats to join in demanding an audit of the Fed. I think that type is okay. But over the years, we've had too much bipartisanship, and that just takes you back to the whole issue of what makes the world tick, and it is ideas that makes the difference. And the parties seem to accept them. This to me is so much more important than the power struggle that's going on, and that's all you hear about. I think the elections are such, it's such a distortion because people think they're really serious, but has the foreign policy changed with Obama versus Bush? Has the monetary policy changed? Has the attitude toward the welfare state changed? It just goes on and on. So it's really what we need is bipartisanship with the right ideas and maybe reverse the trends that we've been suffering from.
Yeah, no question about that. Now, I want to ask, you have a lot of good stuff in here about monetary policy, and there's some discussion of currency competition and references to Hayek and so forth. And I wonder if you could just take a minute to explain. It's hard for people to understand how that would work. They can understand how shoe or bread competition would work, but this strikes people because they're so used to a government monopoly they can't think outside the box. What would your monetary system look like? I mean, not where it would ultimately wind up, but step one is currency competition. What does that actually mean?
Well, you would make it legal to use something other than Federal Reserve notes, that you would take away the power of the cartel, because there is a monopoly or cartel control of the monetary system today, and that's generally the rule. Governments have always liked to have a monopoly control over money so that when they want to debase it, they can get away with it. But, if you had a worldwide gold standard and it was honored and it was developed in the marketplace, you don't have to have a lot of competition. People would just accept it. There might be, maybe silver circulating, gold circulating, and in a free market, those prices would vary, which currency you're using. But today, we've lived for so long, especially the last 40 years, with fiat currencies, with the dollar being the foundation of the fiat currency system, and it has created all our trouble. Now, if you do want to go with the Constitution and use gold and silver today, you can end up going to jail, over this, because you're challenging the monopoly and the legal tender laws. So because of the fluctuating fiat currencies around the world, they trade currencies all the time. Internationally, they're allowed to. They're in and out of all the currency. Every second of the day, it seems like, these exchange rates can vary. And there'd be nothing wrong from my viewpoint that you can do this domestically, especially in the computer age. You could have another currency circulating, but what you would have to do is allow gold and silver to be money. Today, there are too many laws against it. If you wanted to buy a dollar or use a dollar, you don't have to pay a sales tax on it. But if you want to use a gold coin and you go get a gold coin in a coin store or a bank, you have to pay a sales tax on it. And then if your gold coin goes up in value, you have to pay a capital gains tax on it. But for it truly to circulate and people to opt out of the system, you'd have to get rid of those laws. And there's been an attempt to do this in Mexico. There's been people very interested in the silver standard. Mexico has been known for, because they have a lot of silver, to use silver as money. But there's been an honest effort. I have visited with a couple members of their Congress down there. They've come up to see me because they're really interested in promoting that, because the average person in the middle class gets wiped out every time they ruin the peso. So they want to at least allow the people to save their money in a silver account. So I think right now this is a great idea where it's not nearly as threatening to those who would say, well, the only way we can do this is within 24 hours the Federal Reserve is closed down. That sort of scares people, and it would be rather disruptive. So I think getting competition is a great way for any transition away from big government.
Congressman, we have about 1 minute left in this segment. I'd like to ask you, what's next for your Monetary Policy Subcommittee? I mean, the hearing you had with Jim Grant and Lou Lehrman and Joe Salerno was so unbelievably good. Jim Grant should be in D.C. all the time, in my opinion. He's just so funny and smart. So what sorts of topics do you plan to tackle in the future?
Well, we're going to have some Federal Reserve officials. Bernanke won't be coming to my subcommittee. They say that's against the rules. But other members will be, and we are going to be starting to ask them questions about the information that we have gotten. The 29,000 pages which are referred to as the dump because of the consequence of the court rulings. And there's been a lot of good things come from that already. And we're going to push some of these officials on these issues to see how many answers we get. But I think one of the things that I want to do, and persistently, is try to get the Fed to admit what their balance sheet is all about. They hold all these securities, but we don't know what they paid for them and what they're worth now. So they count these trillions of dollars that they have, but it might be worthless paper that they're holding. So exactly. I want to pursue that as well. This is all
great, and we're getting this information largely because of your efforts. hang on just the line. I know Congressman Paul has just a few more minutes with us, so everybody stick around. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods in for Peter. Our final minutes with Congressman Ron Paul, whose time I very much wish to respect, and I thank him once again for taking some time with us. If you folks don't yet have a copy of Liberty Defined, go out and get one. You have 48 hours before you be considered a loser for not having a copy of this book. Make sure and get it. It's a great book, very informative, persuasive. You can give it to your friends. It's a great proselytizing tool. And you're part of history reading something like this, because I suspect we're not exactly going to be flooded with Ron Pauls in the future. Congressman Paul, of course, now, what kind of host would I be if I didn't ask you the most annoying question in the history of mankind? So, I will make a sort of perfunctory effort to ask what your 2012 intentions are, but my real question is, by what date, shall we say, can Americans expect to know one way or the other what you've decided to do?
I think in less than a month, I will be required to make an announcement one way or the other.
Okay. And we've also been hearing about your son, Robert, who seems to at least have some interest in some kind of political office. He would presumably have to make up his mind in the fairly near future as well. Isn't that the case? Yes, and I did talk to him, and right now, I think the media likes to play games with, hints and things like that. You don't say.
I don't think that's likely to happen. Texas, to run for Senate in Texas would be a major, major undertaking. He's a medical doctor, and he's not quite in a position where he can do the amount of work that's required to run a race in Texas. I don't think he's likely to do that.
Okay. But I remember when you and I and your son Rand and Jack Hunter were talking at CPAC, and I asked Rand, do any of your siblings have political ambitions? He didn't give me a clear no. So this does fuel some of the speculation. People are just craving regular people in Congress. Well, in just the couple of minutes we have left, and then I'll let you run, Congressman, what's your sales pitch for Liberty Defined? What are you trying to do with this book, and how's it going to do some good to get it in people's hands?
Well, it was just me sitting down and thinking about the different issues and applying the principles of liberty to the issues. In one area I talk a fair amount about immigration, which is a difficult issue, even for me to write down there because, how emotional it is. And I have a chapter there on Zionism, another difficult chapter, and then on marriage. For instance, applying our principles to the issue of marriage, I think it's just great being a libertarian because you don't have to tell people what to do. And if somebody wants to say they're married, let them say they're married. And I want to get marriage, out of the hands of the state and put it into the church or some type of other contract. It seems like we can come up with so many solutions if we apply the non-aggression principle to it, whether it's in money or school or whatever. I think that was my effort, was to show that it's very practical on the many, many different issues. I frequently talk in generalities and on the principles of liberty, and I tried to apply those principles to hopefully make it easier for other people to argue the case for personal liberty and limited government.
Congressman, as I went through the book, what I found, what I liked is more or less, I think, what you're saying, that to show that your philosophy, I think some people erroneously think your philosophy is sort of a grab bag of a whole bunch of different philosophies. You're liberal, so-called, on this and conservative on that. And this book just shows relentlessly, chapter after chapter, that there is a consistent strain of thought that runs through it all. Well, Congressman, please.
I was going to say, and that is what seems to attract a lot of young people. They like that consistency that comes through.
Right, and that you're not just holding these opinions when it's convenient. And you held these opinions back when there was no youth movement behind you. It was just a lonely congressman doing his best. Well, Congressman Paul, first of all, thank you so much for spending some time with us. And I also just want to say, although I know you don't need to hear it, I still want to say it to you that whenever you are attacked by any of these pygmies who are calling you names and putting you down, I assume that what you're dealing with is an honest man in a world of people, looking for bribes and self-aggrandizement is like crucifix before Dracula. And so every time you're attacked, I want you to know there are a million of us out there who are cheering for you, who have your back, who are supporting you. So go on out there, keep making us proud, and thank you so much for the time today.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Congressman Ron Paul, ladies and gentlemen, come on now. Come on. What a privilege. What a real honor. I want to mention some of